this is Mickey and Sydney's 90% prototype for our e-bike. So our main areas of focus for this prototype was to make sure our electrical was completed and it was fully working and tested. And then we wanted to move on to working with the chains. Since those have been a big issue and a bump in our progress, we wanted to make sure the lengths and the connections were all finalized and working. And then we wanted to be able to have these chains connect to our sprockets and the sprockets be in the right placement on the motors and on the wheel in order for our gear ratio to line up correctly, like how we calculated. So for our electrical, we acquired a new sensor because from our last prototype, we learned that our sensor wasn't working and that it could be an actual hardware issue from the part we had. So I ordered a new one, and this one was a little more expensive, but it's a double Hall sensor, so it has magnets that detect on both sides. And this was actually a 2-part sensor, so it clipped on together, and that metal band around it actually keeps it together. And it also had an indicator light, which flashes when the pedal starts turning. It senses that it's on, and it'll turn the light on to actually show you that it's on. So the last sensor didn't do that, so it was also hard to see if the signal was even getting through. So I had to use the multimeter a lot to figure out what voltage was being passed through and if the connections were all correct, which they ended up being. It just wasn't sensing right. So we tested this, and I tested to see if how the time was from when it started pedaling to when it turned on the motor. And as you can see from this video, it turned on right away, so that was good. And the speed of the motor itself, I thought it was actually going to be faster, but it seemed like it was already geared down. So we need to test with our gear ratios how that's going to work, but it's better for it to be slower since the motor needs to be at a rider's speed. So that was what we did for our electrical part. So for our chains, we are adding another chain because we need one from a motor to a sprocket and then a sprocket to the pedal for our ratio. So the first one we focused on was getting the sprocket to pedal ones, as you can see here. And we went through a lot of complications because the chain, when it was either a little bit too loose or too tight. So when measuring it, we added another link, and I am using a tensioner to make sure it's tight enough for it to not fall off the track, because when we were testing, it started to slip off when we were pedaling. So in the top, you can see the tensioner there, and the sprocket that it's supposed to connect to. So for our sprocket placement and our motor placement, we originally had our sprockets on both of them on one side of the wheel, but since it was a little too crowded for our motor to actually be mounted there, and we didn't want the chains to rub against each other since we are adding another chain to our bike, we decided to move one sprocket on one side and another on the other side, so we could mount the motor by itself and not have to worry about the chains rubbing against each other. And also the placement of the wheel, it was too far to one side, so it would also risk rubbing against the frame and wearing down that wheel there, and also not being balanced. So with the chain, since we had a lot of issue with the other chain that's connects to the pedal with the sizing and stuff, with this chain it's not meant to be adjusted. So with the length that we had, I found that it was better if we mounted our motor more towards the middle of the bike frame. Which we're going to focus on after we test and get this ratio working and our sprockets working. So as long as it's towards the middle, it'll also be better for our balance of the overall bike. So when somebody rides it, it's not tilting to one side more so than the next, because our motor is pretty heavy. And if it was hanging off the side from a plate, it would lean towards one way or the other. And this way, we don't have to worry about anything breaking on the sides too.
So for the sprockets, we kind of wanted to focus on mounting the motor first so we can measure the chains. However, we needed a motor sprocket that fit the chain size that we were using. We bought 2 sprockets that we thought would work. However, they did not even fit the motor shaft. Although it sucked that it didn't work, it did help me narrow down the search for other motor sprockets. So I did find terminologies to use when searching for it, the type of hole size, the chain size, the number chain size that I want to search for, and things like that. But there's literally none. So we needed a temporary replacement so we can start measuring the chains and getting them sized up. So started measuring the chain bearings and the sizes with the calipers and started catting. The first one that we did, misclicked the decimal point, so it came out a little thicker than we wanted. After changing the thickness in the second print, we realized that the length in between the teeth was also miscalculated due to the fact that I put in the diameter in my calculations for figuring out the in-between length, thus giving us a smaller number. So for the third print, we will fix all those mistakes. and pray that the third time really is the charm and that this temporary solution works. However, I'm still on the hunt for a gorgeous motor sprocket that fits all our measurements. So far, nothing has popped up, but the most popular one is a 9 teeth one, so we might have to change our